Hi, and welcome to Drinkosaurus, where we take ancient cocktail recipes into the modern era. My name's Matt, and let's get drinking. In today's episode, we're going to continue talking about the old-fashioned template, and with a slight modification, we're going to open up a ton of different varieties you can make at home. And in today's episode, we're going to make 2 different cocktails, both of which use the same template, but are very different in their character. If you'd like to learn more about the old-fashioned, make sure to check out episode 3, where we do a deeper investigation into the old-fashioned template. To review, the old-fashioned is comprised mostly of sugar, bitters, and a spirit. Due to the simplicity of this template, it's often considered to be one of the first cocktails ever made. What we're going to do to change this classic template is we're going to add a half-part modifier to add us a little bit more room for variation. In both of our drinks today, we want to pick a spirit, a modifier, a sugary sort of sweetness agent, and a bitters that all kind of fall into the same flavor category. And if you can find ingredients that do that, congratulations, you have an old-fashioned variant. This template is great if you have a spirit or liqueur that you don't quite know what to use, but you can use this template because it doesn't have many ingredients, so it's really easy to find things that blend well with it. The first old-fashioned variant we're going to talk about was based off of me purchasing Allspice Dram, which is a super potent liqueur that has a cinnamony and nutmeg sort of flavor. And I wanted to feature it in a cocktail, but it's kind of tricky to mix with other things just because of its potency. We're going to be using Allspice Dram to fill in that modifier category. So we still need a spirit, a sweetening agent, and a bitters to go along with it. For the spirit, something that works well with spice is either rum or bourbon. And in this case, we're going to stick with bourbon and use a maple bourbon that I got from Vermont. The sweetening agent doesn't necessarily have to be a syrup or something sugary. We're going to bring back an ingredient from one of the first episodes. We're going to use Nocino, which is a sweet walnut liqueur. I feel that all these ingredients work well together because they have a spicy, sweet, and nutty characteristic, which complements all 3 flavors. So we need a bitters that also falls into that same flavor category. And I can't think of anything better but some black walnut bitters to complement our Nocino. Now we have an ingredient to fit each of our requirements. We have our spirit, modifier, sweetening agent, and bitters. I want to sweeten this drink up a little bit more and kind of honor the bourbon that we're using from Vermont. So what we're going to do is put in some maple syrup as a further sweetening agent. This is some Vermont maple syrup that's been aged in bourbon casks. And we're also going to add some Angostura bitters just to add some more complexity to our drink and add more spice to an already sweet drink. We're going to keep our ratios pretty similar to the original template I proposed, with 2 ounces of bourbon, a ½ ounce of our Allspice Dram. We're going to use a ½ ounce of Nocino, a few dashes of each of the bitters, and just a little bit of maple syrup to start. So now that we have all of our ingredients, let us begin the mixing. In the previous episode, I talked about the times when you would mix versus shake. We are using a syrup in our drink this time, but since it's only a small amount, we don't have to really worry about emulsification. So we are going to mix this drink today. We have our mixing spoon and our julep strainer, and we have our measuring cups as well. What we're going to do is start with our maple syrup and our bitters, which typically when you make an old... I can't open it. Can you open it, Jen?
I can try.
Wow, that was great. We're going to start with our maple syrup and we're going to add just a little bit, about that much. We want it to sweeten our drink and add more maple flavor, but we don't want to make our drink too sweet. What we'll do now is add a few dashes of each of our bitters. So we'll start with the Angostura bitters, give it about a dash and a half. And then our black walnut bitters, similar ratios there. To make it so we don't have to shake, we're going to kind of muddle these ingredients together a bit, just so they'll play nicely with our thinner, less dense ingredients. So we're going to give it a quick mix. As Rachel Ray would say, give it a quick zhuzh. We're going to start with 2 ounces of our bourbon. And once again, this is a maple bourbon from Vermont. If you ever visit Vermont and go to any of their distilleries, there's maple everything, because that's what happens in Vermont. Next, we're going to add a ½ ounce of our Allspice Dram and our Nocino. Allspice Dram is an ingredient that's worth purchasing. It shows up in quite a bit of drinks, and you only need a little bit of it for it to go a long way. Next, we'll add our Nocino, which you might remember from the black truffle. Nocino is also an awesome ingredient. It just seems to make every drink better. So we'll add that in. So now that all of our ingredients are in our drink, let us add our ice and we're going to start mixing. Good. Today we're going to use a rocks glass, which is typical for the old-fashioned, and we need to add our rock to it. That ice cube will continue to dilute the drink just a little bit and keep it nice and cold. And, ooh, doesn't that look tasty? We are almost there. It's time for my favorite part, the garnish. We're going to use an orange peel to keep it in the typical character of an old-fashioned. You know how this goes. Let's see what happens today. Oh, I did it! I did it, and it didn't roll, and it didn't do everything terrible. It's great. So we're going to express those orange oils over. I don't know if you could see it on camera, but those orange oils were quite expressive today. We're gonna give the glass a, we're gonna do this. I wanna call it a Remy, but I'm not gonna call it a Remy this time, even though I just called it a Remy. Slide that in there, give it a little, nice. And I present to you the Burlington in celebration of the Vermont ingredients. So it smells like orange because we put all the orange oil in there, but let's taste it. Oh, that's really good. Isn't it weird that I'm like impressed that my drinks are good? Wow, so this tastes similar to an old-fashioned because it has bourbon as the spirit, which keeps in line with the traditional old-fashioned. But man, that Allspice Dram, that maple syrup, and that Nocino just adds so much more flavor characteristics and adds sweetness without directly adding sugar. Well, aside from the maple syrup. This is a kind of a wintry riff on the old-fashioned, and I wish it was snowing outside because this just makes me want to like sit in front of a fireplace with the nice snow outside and, you know, just be at a ski lodge or something. Keeping the Nocino and the Allspice Dram to only a ½ ounce really makes the bourbon shine, which is good because an old-fashioned should be boozy, it should be spirit forward, and this drink preserves that, but it adds some extra sweetness in an unexpected way. So that's drink one. For our next drink, we're gonna go completely in a different direction, and instead of talking about Vermont, which is kind of the northern border of the US, we're gonna go to the south border and mix with some Mexican ingredients. Let's clear our ingredients and get ready for our next drink. The last old-fashioned started with inspiration from the modifier. This one's going to start from the spirit, but we're actually not going to use a spirit, we're instead going to use a liqueur. That happens to be 80 proof, which makes it basically indistinguishable from a spirit. This is Ancho Reyes, which is made from ancho chili. I love it by itself, but it's really hard to mix with other ingredients because it has this weird sweet and spicy thing going on, which for whatever reason just either completely gets buried beneath other ingredients or is really distracting. So this old-fashioned variant that we're using complements this really well because it allows it to be the star of the show, and then we can pick ingredients that specifically cater to it. So this will serve the spot as our spirit. Our modifier this time, we're gonna use a legitimate spirit, which is mezcal, which kind of fits in with the chili Mexican sort of theme. We had a video on another Scorcher cocktail where we talk about mezcal in more detail, so make sure to check that out. Drinkosaurus episode 4. For our sweetening agent, we're not going to use a syrup this time, but instead we're going to use Luxardo maraschino liqueur, which is a cherry liqueur. It's not super sweet, but it adds that sweet sort of flavor to our cocktail. You might be asking, how does cherry fit into this? I don't know why, but somehow mezcal and Mexican flavors fit really well with cherry. It's a nice fruity complement to those other ingredients. Finally, for our bitters, we're going to use 2 again. We're going to use some habanero bitters to add a little bit of heat to our drink, and we're gonna add some mole bitters, which will add even more sweetness, but in the form of cinnamon and mole flavors. Keeping faithful to our original ratios, we're gonna use 2 ounces of the ancho chili liqueur, a ½ ounce of the mezcal. We're going to dial this down a bit and use only a ¼ ounce, just because I don't want the cherry flavor to dominate too much. I want it to be an accent, not a feature. And finally, a few dashes of these bitters, but since they're in droppers, we're gonna just use a certain amount of drips. That's weird. Why did I have to say that? No, they don't need to know that. I could have just said dashes, it would have been fine. We're gonna use it though. we will need our mixing glass for this drink. We have no juices, no syrups this time, so we can just mix everything. And unlike the previous old-fashioned variant, since we don't have a maple syrup or agave syrup or anything like that, we can just add our bitters last, so there's no need for any special preparations. So let's get going. We're gonna start with 2 ounces of our ancho chili liqueur. This is super interesting because it is spicy, as chili suggests, but it also has a nice sweetness. And the thing I love most about it is it's 80 proof, so it is not going to decrease our alcohol content in our drink at all. So next we're going to use a 1/2 ounce of our mezcal. Our mezcal will add a smokiness to it to add to the complexity, and it'll also keep our spirit content high, because mezcal typically is 80 proof or above. As I mentioned before, we're going to use slightly less than a 1/2 ounce of this. I'm just going to fill this about halfway instead of worrying about a bar spoon. Really play around with this to taste. I use this in opposition to other cherry liqueurs just because the alcohol content's a bit high and it's less sweet and syrupy than other ones, because I want to really keep this in the old-fashioned spirit and keep it spirit forward. Next, we're going to add some of our bitters. I'm going to start with the mole bitters to add a little bit more sweetness. Since this uses the dropper, usually maybe like 1/2 dropper, but maybe, I don't know. I've used this enough times where I kind of know how much drops correspond to how much flavor I want, but you can play around with it. I'm also going to use habanero bitters. Be careful with this, it makes your drink spicy, and the ancho chili liqueur is also spicy. So this is really to taste. An interesting property of this is it has a vinegar base, and vinegar is an acid, so this will add some acidity to our drink without having to add any lime or lemon juices. So we have all of our ingredients together. What we're going to do now is add some ice carefully. And let's get mixing. Spicy. Oh God, it is really spicy. In the past, I've made this drink with muddling a serrano pepper. Usually in an old fashioned, there's a muddling aspect that's missing from this drink. Don't do that. Serrano peppers are spicy and there's already enough spice in here. So unless you want a drink that is more spicy than it is refreshing, I would avoid doing something like that. We're going to take our drink, add it to our rocks glass, add our rock in again, and that'll continue to dilute the drink as we pour it. Ooh. Our previous drink we garnished with an orange peel. To keep it in the south of the border style, we're going to use a lime, which I think will complement the flavors a bit more. And you thought oranges were hard to peel? Wait till you see me peel this lime. Ah! I got scared. Let's try again. Though I think that's probably as best as I'm gonna get. I mean, that'll work. We'll use both. So we're gonna express the lime juices there. Give it the old Remy. I'm actually gonna use both so I can make sure I get enough lime essence in there. Put this monstrosity away, put our other ingredients away, and I present to you, hi, welcome to Chili's. Because there's chilies in there. I could use a better name for this drink, so make sure to comment on a better name for this drink, maybe something that incorporates Mexico and chili and cherry. We went through a lot of different variations, all of them were terrible, and hi, welcome to Chili's, just, you know, gotta do it for the memes. So right away on the nose, there's a lot of that lime oil, which really kind of welcomes us into that more Mexican vibe that we're going for. Let's see how it tastes. That's awesome. So the first flavor to hit your palate is the mezcal. So that smoky kind of tequila inspired flavor. You get a little bit of like a pop from the cherry liqueur, and then it finishes up with that chili spiciness. So the aftertaste is really spicy, but not too spicy. It's enough to be refreshing, but enough to be interesting. So this drink is super unconventional because it uses ancho chili liqueur as the base spirit, which, like I said before, is really hard to mix with other drinks. But this one, it's the star of the show, and we made sure to pick ingredients that work well with it to make a well-balanced cocktail. In the spirit of the old fashioned though, it is mostly spirit forward with just that little bit of sweet and bitterness to balance out the other flavors. Holy shit, this is so good. I'm on fire today. The old-fashioned is a template that's super easy to make variations of. And with our addition of a modifier, it opens up those possibilities even more. Hopefully with this episode, you are starting to think of some ways that you can use some of your ingredients at home to make a great variant. Drinkosaurus is a production of Little Giant Monsters. If you have any comments, write them. Drinkosaurus is a production of Little Giant Monsters. If you have any questions for me or have any ingredients that you don't quite know how to use, please comment below because I will use them as inspiration for future videos. You can also find us on social media, which is down in the description below, and we have a Patreon. So if you like what we're doing on the show, consider supporting us there. That's all for today's episode. Keep mixing and make sure you drink responsibly. Goodbye. It's so good. It's so good. Ugh, I'm a little drunk.